Hello, I'm the Eternal Newbie. The extra L is for least, as in the least best game of all time. Confused? Well, today's story is about the least best or worst game I've ever had the fortune to be a part of. Now, you're probably thinking, how can you be fortunate to be in a bad game? That makes as much sense as a screen door on a battleship.
Screen door on a submarine, you dork.
But it actually does, and let me tell you why. Because it wasn't my fault. If you've watched my other videos, you probably think I'm some sort of D&D god, like Mighty Helm or Blip-Doo-Poop, who's good at everything, who never makes mistakes, but occasionally I mess up. This time, however, I didn't even get the chance. There were so many things going wrong, and none of them were because of me. It was magical. Before I begin, a little disclaimer. The story you're about to hear is true. Certain non-consequential details have been changed to protect the innocent, but everything I say here happened. So sit back and relax as I spin the yarn of the worst game ever. This was an Adventure League game, played online on Discord and Roll20. An interesting thing about Adventure League for those of you who have not played is the modules are timed. This module was supposed to take 2 hours, though it has been my experience they can run a bit longer. It's not unusual for a 2-hour module to run 3 or even 3.5 hours. How long was this one, you ask?
What is the number? The number of the day scheduled to arrive. The number of the day is 5.
That's right. 5 hours. I started taking notes at about the 2-hour mark just for fun. Looking back over them, the things I wrote ranged from the mildly annoying, like one player having music in the background that kept activating his microphone, to the pretty annoying, like the DM forgetting parts of the story then recontouring them 10 minutes later, to the incredibly annoying, like a couple of players who constantly talked over the DM. So we started in a village where we were hired to find out who was causing problems. We're pointed towards a guy in town who I'll refer to as Suspect 1, and one of us goes to question him. But the questioner, our wizard, decides he's not going to question the guy himself. He's going to send his familiar in question using the message spell. Suspect 1 is having none of it. Talks to the rat for like a minute and says, "I'll talk to you, but not your familiar." The wizard decides, in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, talking rats should be completely normal. So he says, "How do you know I'm a familiar?" Talking through his rat. Suspect 1 ignores him. The player keeps talking through his rat. He is ignored, and the DM's subtle hints like, he's not going to talk to your rat anymore, or he'll talk to you but not to the rat, fall on deaf ears. This leads to a 20-minute discussion about how Suspect 1 would know it was a familiar and not a regular talking rat. It was even less interesting than it sounds. And to let you in on a little secret if you're not familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, rats don't talk. While all this is going down, me and another player notice someone skulking around town and we follow him. It was Suspect 1's teenage son. I'll call him Little Suspect. He leads us to another guy who promptly knocks him out. We save him and capture the attacker. Did I mention we had split the party? Well, for about the first 2 hours of this adventure, everyone wanted to do something different. While the wizard was questioning Suspect 1, the fighter and I were watching his house. That's where we saw Little Suspect skulking around. The warlock was questioning random people he saw and insight checking everything. Like an NPC would say, "Good day to you, sir." And he would shout, "Insight check." I was born in this village. "Insight check." I kid you not. An NPC said, "I have to go to work, but it was nice talking to you." And he insight checked it. Spoiler, the NPC did have to go to work. but it wasn't nice talking to him. Meanwhile, the fighter and I searched the attacker and little suspect and figured out that the attacker had faked a note from the kid's girlfriend to lure him out there. Well, I figured this out from the really subtle hint the DM gave, like, you find a note from his girlfriend asking for a meeting, but notice the handwriting is slightly different from the other notes you find. The fighter didn't quite get this point and wanted to go question the girlfriend. When the fighter said this, the DM was silent. I imagine his face looked just like mine because he had literally just said the handwriting was different. So I say, she had nothing to do with it. The handwriting was different, remember? He's like, oh yeah, okay, I got you. And we move on. When we meet up with the rest of the party and let them know what's going on, he again wants to go talk to the girlfriend. The wizard explains about the handwriting and he's like, oh yeah.
But why male models?
You serious? I just told you that a moment ago.
Now you might think this player's a little slow, but he later would make intense rule arguments that sounded like he knew what he was talking about, and he was one of the rules lawyers in the game. So I'm not sure what was going on. Maybe he was just messing with us, because he does bring up questioning the girlfriend 2 more times.
But why male models?
After much discussion, we finally question the guy we caught and learn where the big bad is. He agrees to lead us there, but not before our wizard gets his rat to go find the father and tell him what happened to his son. This leads to a long discussion about whether the familiar could talk that far away from the wizard. It probably only lasted like 10 minutes, but it felt like 10 hours. We had the wizard, 2 rules lawyers, and the DM. Wizard and rule lawyer number 1 wants it to happen. Rule lawyer 2 and DM say no. Now I'd learned by this point to stay out of these conversations, because they just go back and forth and nothing got solved basically until the DM got annoyed and said, this is what we're doing. And then the other side would grudgingly agree. But after listening to them all say the exact same thing for 10 minutes, I kind of had to put myself in this one because I actually knew the answer. I said one thing. I'm pretty sure the familiar has the same intelligence as a regular rat. Wizard gets mad when it's ruled that his familiar can't carry on a conversation on its own. But the DM does let the familiar deliver the message, so here comes the father, and he starts to threaten the attacker, who by the way is our prisoner and tied to a tree at this moment. I try to deflect him, but he's having none of it. Apparently the father was supposed to punch his son's attacker. We didn't know this. We just knew that he wanted us to let him get to the guy, and we still needed him. So 2 of us stand between him and the attacker. I don't know if the punching was super important to this story or not, but the father's not backing down. He has 2 armed adventurers between him and the attacker, and he starts threatening us. It's going to be a fight if we don't move. The DM basically told us that. And by basically, I mean straight out told us that. We didn't budge because we didn't want him to kill our prisoner. The DM gets frustrated at us and straight out told us he was just going to punch the guy, not kill him. I was like, whatever, and moved. But then it happened. The moment I knew this game was unsavable, the wizard, who was the other one standing there, got mad and said, well, if you're going to keep metagaming like that, I'll move. This was a turning point because now the DM was pissed at him. In the wizard's defense, he did kind of have a reason to say this because the DM kept giving us hints in the game. But in the DM's defense, he did have a reason to keep giving us hints because he kept forgetting to tell us important parts of the story that we needed. It was a really interesting dynamic. So we get to the big bad's cabin, and we're sneaking into position to get a surprise attack on the bad guys. There's like 7 random orcs and goblins here that we can see. We plan to sneak up on them and get some surprise attacks. We're all sneaking into position when player 1 gets there first and decides to attack before we're ready. He does surprise his goblin, and he kills it, so good for him. The DM asks him, how does it die? And player 1 says, it screams as it goes down. Now, this is the same, let's go question the girlfriend guy.
But why male models?
And he's been arguing with the DM about all kinds of things. Range of spells, how far someone could move, really petty stuff that this guy couldn't move 40 feet this turn, only 30 feet. He was usually right on this stuff, but the DM was getting sick of it. He's been getting pissier and pissier ever since the metagaming comment. So he says, oh, the guy screamed? Surprise round over, roll for initiative. So the rest of us lost it. No biggie. Combat begins. Combat takes forever. I timed how long it was between my turns for a few rounds. There were 4 players and 7 monsters. The first time it took 14 minutes between my turns, and the second time it was 23. I stopped timing after that. We're low level, so it's not like we have a lot of choices during our turns. Mine was basically pop out of cover, shoot bow, pop back in. The DM's going easy on us because we are way underpowered for this module. But he was getting mad at me because as a rogue, I would jump out of cover, attack, then go back into cover, and he wanted to spread out the attacks to everybody. He'd measure the distance to see there was bushes or rocks in the way, and then he'd say, well, I can't attack you, so I have to attack him. The wizard's like, fine, attack me. That's what the character would do anyway. Now, the DM was still stewing about the metagaming comment. He'd been muttering about it ever since it happened, but this pushed him over the edge. Okay, you asked for it, he said. Then he became real passive-aggressive for the rest of the game. He would say things like, well, you're right here, so I'm going to hit you twice. Don't want to metagame or anything. Or, I was going easy on you, but not anymore. I don't want people to think I'm a bad DM. Stuff like that as the combat continued. Hours after it started, though, it finally ended and we'd won. This incredibly uncomfortable game was almost over. I mean, we searched the bodies, we let the prisoners go, we searched the cabin, and the DM was really annoyed this whole time because he just wanted this game over with. He was insulted. So that was basically it. Quite a bit more things happened that I left out because I didn't want this video to turn out super long. How about a top 6 list of the things I didn't get to? Why 6, you ask? Because that's what my graphic says. Number 6, the DM asked us what the DC should be for the NPC we caught escaping. Number 5, someone in the DM's house kept activating his microphone by dropping F-bombs. I don't know what his problem was, but he was really angry. Number 4, a 15-minute conversation about what the familiar sees while scouting the big bad's cabin. And more importantly, what the familiar did not see. Number 3, DM missing players' turns, then getting impatient with them. Number 2, 2 players explaining a spellcasting rule, agreeing, then spending 20 more minutes arguing about it in the middle of combat. Both sides arguing the same point. And number 1, the same player who is mad the DM gave too many clues and asked about metagaming wanted to know the exact DC of a stealth check before he attempted it. There were other things, but do I really need to go on? Thanks for listening to my story. Why don't you let me know about your worst game in the comments below? If you like this video, check out my others, and a subscribe would be much appreciated. As always, have yourself just a mighty fine day.